I was an 18-year-old CPS agent who went undercover as a traumatized 12-year-old foster kid to investigate the Ericksons after 3 children mysteriously died in their care. On my first night, Mrs. Erickson locked me in their basement with just a bucket for a bathroom and told me I'd earn food through good behavior. When Mr. Erickson started visiting the basement to describe exactly how the other foster kids had their accidents, I realized why none of them had survived to testify. I showed up at the Erickson house with a black eye, unwashed hair, and a garbage bag of thrift store clothes that reeked of cigarette smoke. My caseworker Elizabeth knocked on their suburban door while I hunched behind her, playing the part of a traumatized 12-year-old perfectly. In reality, I was 18, and part of the youngest undercover operative CPS had ever approved. Mrs. Erickson's smile melted off her face the second she saw me. She took one look at my torn sneakers and the bruises I'd carefully applied with makeup, and her whole body language shifted. Without even introducing herself, she told Elizabeth to just leave the paperwork on the porch. Elizabeth's voice stayed professional as she explained I'd need to be shown my room and given the house rules. Mrs. Erickson rolled her eyes and said she'd handled dozens of these kids before. She knew the drill. When Elizabeth reached out to shake my hand goodbye before leaving, Mrs. Erickson physically stepped between us. She pulled out hand sanitizer and pumped it aggressively while explaining that foster kids often carried diseases. I tried to speak up, practicing the scared whisper we'd rehearsed. "Where do I?" Mrs. Erickson cut me off with a sharp laugh. "I've heard every manipulation tactic in the book, so don't even try that innocent little girl biz with me." She grabbed my garbage bag and held it at arm's length, leading me inside. Mr. Erickson emerged from the kitchen and looked me up and down like I was livestock. "Another runner?" he asked his wife. She shrugged and said, "Probably, based on the black eye." She dropped my bag on the floor and used her foot to push it toward the basement door. "Your room's downstairs," she announced. "Not a bedroom, a basement." She flicked on a single bare bulb illuminating concrete walls and a stained mattress on the floor. "Bathroom's upstairs, but that's for family," she said. She pointed to a bucket in the corner. "You'll make do." The teddy bear tucked under my arm, the one item I'd fought to keep, recorded everything through its hidden camera eye. She showed me the lock on the outside of the door. "For your protection," she said, demonstrating how it clicked. "Foster kids sleepwalk. Can't have you wandering into our children's rooms." At dinner, I sat on the floor in the corner while the Erickson family ate pot roast at their dining table. Mrs. Erickson tossed a piece of bread and a cup of water my way without looking. "You'll earn better food with good behavior," she said. Their biological daughter Bethany laughed. "The last one took 3 weeks to earn peanut butter." I reached for the bread, but Mr. Erickson slapped my hand so hard it left a mark. "Say please first," he commanded. "Just because you were raised like an animal doesn't mean you'll act like one here." My handler had warned me it would be bad. 3 kids had died in this home over 5 years, all ruled as accidents. But living it was different than reading the files. That night, locked in the basement, I activated the emergency recorder sewn into my teddy bear's stomach. Every sound would transmit directly to CPS headquarters. The real torture started on day 3. Mrs. Erickson decided I smelled. She stripped me in the backyard and hosed me down with freezing water while their children watched from the window. "Can't have you contaminating our shower," she explained to the neighbors who peered over the fence. "These kids come from horrible places." When I shivered, she sprayed directly in my face. I made sure that the camera in my teddy bear caught her smile. She started withholding food as punishment for imagined infractions. Looking at her children was worth skipping breakfast. Speaking without permission meant no lunch. By day 5, I was dizzy with hunger, playing the part too well. But it was Mr. Erickson who truly made my blood run cold. He'd wait until his wife was shopping to visit the basement. He'd sit on the stairs and describe what happened to the other foster kids. How one fell down these very stairs. How another accidentally drank cleaning fluid. How the third one wandered off and was found in the river. "Foster kids are so clumsy," he'd say, pulling out his knife to clean his nails. "So many accidents happen when no one's paying attention." On day 7, they escalated to physical abuse. Mrs. Erickson discovered I'd hidden a granola bar in my pillowcase. One, their daughter Bethany had actually snuck me out of pity. She grabbed my hair and dragged me up the stairs, my bear falling and bouncing behind us, still recording. She called me a thief, a liar, proof that foster kids were genetically damaged. She made me stand in the corner of the kitchen for 6 hours. When I swayed from exhaustion, she'd slam a pot next to my head. Their children ate ice cream at the table, laughing each time I flinched. When I finally collapsed, Mr. Erickson grabbed my arm and twisted it behind my back. "3 more kids are coming next month," he whispered. "More checks. You'll be gone by then, one way or another." That's when I heard sirens outside. Through the window, I saw 2 police cars and a CPS van. Someone had called them about an abusive foster family. My handler's voice crackled through the emergency earpiece hidden in my hair. The Ericksons froze at the sound of car doors slamming outside. Mrs. Erickson released my hair and rushed to the window, her face draining of color as she counted the vehicles. Mr. Erickson's knife clattered to the floor. I stayed crumpled on the kitchen tiles, maintaining my cover even as relief flooded through me. The teddy bear lay sideways against the wall, its camera eye capturing Mrs. Erickson's panicked movements as she grabbed dish towels and frantically wiped down the counters. Mr. Erickson kicked the knife under the refrigerator and smoothed his shirt. Heavy footsteps thundered up the porch steps. The doorbell rang 3 times in quick succession, followed by authoritative knocking. Mrs. Erickson shot me a look of pure venom before plastering on her fake smile and opening the door. Detective Martinez stood on the threshold with 2 uniformed officers flanking him. Behind them, I recognized Sarah Chen from CPS, though she gave no indication she knew me. Her expression remained professionally neutral as she held up official paperwork. Mrs. Erickson's voice pitched high and sweet. She welcomed them inside, explaining there must be some misunderstanding. She'd been a foster parent for 15 years with an exemplary record. Mr. Erickson nodded along, adding that they'd helped dozens of troubled children. Detective Martinez's eyes swept the kitchen and landed on me. I remained motionless on the floor, letting him take in my disheveled appearance, the red marks on my arms, the way I flinched when Mr. Erickson shifted his weight. The detective's jaw tightened. Sarah Chen requested to see my living quarters. Mrs. Erickson hesitated, then led the group toward the basement door, chattering about how they'd converted the space specially for foster children who needed structure. She fumbled with the lock on the outside of the door, trying to explain it away as a safety measure. The officers descended first. I heard one of them curse under his breath at the sight of the bucket in the corner. Sarah Chen documented everything with her phone while Mrs. Erickson's explanations grew more frantic. The stained mattress, the bare bulb, the concrete walls with no windows. Upstairs, Detective Martinez crouched beside me. He asked if I was hurt, if I needed medical attention. I shook my head slightly, staying in character as a traumatized child. He helped me sit up against the wall and noticed the teddy bear. His eyes lingered on it for a moment before he stood. Bethany and her younger brother appeared in the doorway, still holding their ice cream bowls. They stared at the scene unfolding in their kitchen. Bethany's face had gone pale, the spoon trembling in her hand. Her brother whispered something about the foster girl getting them in trouble. Mrs. Erickson emerged from the basement, her fake smile cracking at the edges. She launched into a speech about difficult children making false accusations for attention. She'd seen it before. Foster kids would say anything to get moved to a new placement. Surely the officers understood. Sarah Chen interrupted to ask about my meals. Where did I eat? What had I been given? Mrs. Erickson gestured vaguely at the kitchen table, claiming I ate with the family. Her own daughter's eyes widened at the lie. Detective Martinez noticed Bethany's reaction. He approached her gently, asking if she'd like to talk to him in the living room. Mrs. Erickson moved to intervene, but an officer stepped between them. Bethany glanced at me, then at her mother, before following the detective out of the kitchen. Mr. Erickson's calm facade finally cracked. He demanded to know who had called in this false report. He'd sue for defamation. This was harassment of upstanding citizens. His voice rose with each word until he was practically shouting about his rights. An officer suggested he calm down. Mr. Erickson took a step toward him, fists clenched. Two officers immediately moved to restrain him, though he hadn't quite crossed the line to assault. The tension in the kitchen ratcheted higher. Through the doorway, I could see Bethany speaking quietly to Detective Martinez. Her hands twisted in her lap as she glanced back toward the kitchen. Whatever she was saying made the detective's expression grow darker by the second. Mrs. Erickson must have sensed the shift too. She suddenly remembered urgent paperwork in her home office that would clear up this misunderstanding. She tried to leave the kitchen, but Sarah Chen politely insisted she stay while they completed their investigation. The basement door opened again. An officer emerged carrying my garbage bag of belongings. Behind him, another officer held evidence bags. Mrs. Erickson's hospitality makes a cardboard box under a bridge look like a five-star resort. At least cardboard doesn't come with a torture bucket and garden hose showers. Through the clear plastic, I could see the bucket, photographed and tagged. They'd found other things too. Scratch marks on the doorframe, what looked like dried blood on the concrete floor. Mr. Erickson's shouting intensified. This was planted evidence. The foster girl had done this herself. They all did it. Self-harm for sympathy. He'd seen it dozens of times. His wife nodded frantically, adding her own accusations about my manipulative behavior. Detective Martinez returned to the kitchen with Bethany trailing behind. She wouldn't meet her parents' eyes. The detective announced they'd be taking me for a medical evaluation and emergency placement. The investigation would continue, and the Ericksons should expect further contact. Mrs. Erickson's mask finally slipped completely. She pointed at me, screaming that I'd destroyed her family. I was ungrateful trash who bit the hand that fed me. Didn't I know how lucky I was? Other foster kids had it so much worse. At least she'd given me a roof and food. Sarah Chen helped me to my feet. I clutched my teddy bear, making sure its camera captured Mrs. Erickson's breakdown. Mr. Erickson tried one last time to assert control, blocking our path to the door. He insisted on speaking to supervisors, lawyers, anyone who would listen to reason. The officers firmly moved him aside. As Sarah guided me past, Mr. Erickson leaned close enough that I could smell his coffee breath. His whisper was too quiet for anyone else to hear, but my teddy bear's sensitive microphone would catch every word about what happened to kids who talked. Outside, the evening air felt like freedom, even though I had to maintain my cover. Neighbors had gathered on their lawns, phones out, recording everything. Mrs. Erickson's reputation in the community was crumbling in real time. Sarah helped me into the CPS van. Through the window, I watched officers leading Mr. Erickson out in handcuffs. He'd finally crossed the line, shoving an officer while trying to get to me. Mrs. Erickson followed, shrieking about lawsuits and false arrests. As we pulled away, I caught a glimpse of Bethany in her bedroom window. She raised her hand slightly, maybe in apology, maybe in goodbye. Her younger brother stood beside her, still not understanding why the foster girl had ruined everything. The van drove 3 blocks before pulling into an empty parking lot. Sarah Chen turned to face me, dropping her professional facade. She squeezed my shoulder and told me I'd done an incredible job. The evidence I'd gathered would ensure the Ericksons never fostered again. But this was just the beginning. There would be formal statements, medical documentation, and careful coordination to maintain my cover story. The Ericksons still had connections, lawyers, and a history of making problems disappear. We'd need every piece of evidence to make this stick. Sarah Chen drove us to a safe house 20 minutes away, a nondescript apartment building where CPS conducted debriefings. My handler waited inside, pacing the small living room with a tablet displaying real-time uploads from my teddy bear's camera. He embraced me briefly before we got to work documenting everything while memories remained fresh. The medical examiner arrived within the hour. She photographed every bruise, every mark, carefully distinguishing between the makeup I'd applied and the real injuries the Ericksons had inflicted. Her gentle hands cataloged the handprint on my wrist from Mr. Erickson's grip, the scalp tenderness from Mrs. Erickson dragging me by my hair, the dehydration from systematic food deprivation. My handler reviewed the footage while I showered off days of grime. The hot water stung against raw skin, but I savored the luxury after that basement bucket. When I emerged, he showed me what the bear had captured. Mrs. Erickson's cruelty played out in high definition. Mr. Erickson's threats echoed through the apartment's speakers. Even Bethany's conflicted expressions came through clearly. Sarah Chen returned with troubling news. The Ericksons had already contacted their lawyer, a family friend who'd helped them navigate previous investigations. They claimed I was a troubled teen who'd staged everything for attention. Their biological children would testify to my unstable behavior. Without the recordings, it would be their word against mine. We spent the night preparing my official statement. Every detail had to align with what a traumatized 12-year-old would remember and articulate. Too much precision would seem coached. Too little would leave gaps their lawyer could exploit. I practiced trembling, stammering, letting tears fall at strategic moments. Morning brought complications. The Ericksons' lawyer had filed an emergency motion claiming CPS had violated protocol by removing me without proper documentation. He argued the basement setup was a therapeutic environment for children with behavioral issues. The lock was for safety. The bucket was a temporary measure while plumbing repairs were scheduled. My handler slammed his fist on the table when he heard 3 children had died under the Ericksons' care, but their lawyer had spun each tragedy into an unfortunate accident involving troubled youth. The system that should protect children instead protected their killers through bureaucratic loopholes. Sarah Chen coordinated with Detective Martinez to strengthen our case. They needed Bethany's testimony, but her parents had already begun their manipulation. Through the apartment window, I watched news vans arrive at the Erickson house. Their lawyer stood on the lawn, painting them as victims of a vindictive foster child and an overzealous CPS. The counterattack came swiftly. Mrs. Erickson appeared on local morning shows, tears streaming as she described her family's dedication to helping troubled children. She displayed photos of smiling foster kids from years past, conveniently omitting the 3 who never made it out alive. Her performance was masterful, turning public opinion against CPS. My handler decided we needed more evidence. The recordings were damning, but the Ericksons' lawyer would challenge their admissibility. He arranged for me to give a formal video deposition that afternoon, maintaining my cover as a 12-year-old victim while ensuring every detail was captured officially. During preparation, Sarah Chen's phone buzzed constantly. Other foster children who'd survived the Erickson house were reaching out, emboldened by news of the investigation. Their stories painted a pattern of escalating abuse that the system had ignored for years. One boy described being locked in the basement for a week. A girl recounted being forced to eat spoiled food as punishment. The video deposition took place in a sterile conference room. I sat across from a child advocacy lawyer while cameras recorded every word. I let my voice shake as I described the basement, the bucket, the systematic starvation. When asked about the teddy bear, I clutched it tightly and explained how it was my only comfort in that dark place. Halfway through, the Ericksons' lawyer burst in demanding to cross-examine me. My handler blocked his path, but the man's presence rattled me genuinely. He resembled Mr. Erickson in his calculated coldness, the type who saw foster children as disposable income streams rather than human beings. Security removed him, but damage was done. I'd flinched visibly on camera, lending credence to their claim that I was an unstable teenager rather than a trained operative. My handler called a break, reminding me that showing vulnerability actually strengthened our case. Real victims didn't maintain perfect composure. That evening, Detective Martinez visited with concerning updates. The Ericksons had hired a private investigator to dig into my background. If they discovered my real age or CPS operative status, the entire case would collapse. Worse, it would taint every future investigation involving undercover work. We accelerated our timeline. Sarah Chen filed emergency paperwork to formalize the evidence before the Ericksons could discredit it. My handler arranged for the teddy bear's recordings to be authenticated by technical experts who could testify to their integrity. Every minute counted as their lawyer mounted an aggressive defense. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Bethany Erickson called the CPS hotline at 2 a.m., whispering through tears. Her parents had threatened to send her to boarding school if she testified against them. She'd seen what they did to foster kids who crossed them. She was terrified of becoming their next victim. Detective Martinez picked her up from a friend's house where she'd fled. In the safety of the police station, she revealed years of witnessing abuse. She'd tried to help previous foster children, sneaking them food like she'd done with me. Each time her parents punished her severely, and the foster kids disappeared shortly after. Her testimony was devastating. She described watching her father push a foster boy down the basement stairs, then claim he'd tripped. She'd seen her mother force-feed a girl cleaning chemicals as punishment for lying about the abuse. The third death, the drowning, happened during a family camping trip where no foster child should have wandered off alone. Mrs. Erickson's public facade crumbled when police arrested her at the television studio, where she'd scheduled another sympathy interview. The footage of her being handcuffed in full makeup and pearls played across every local channel. Mr. Erickson tried to flee, but was caught at the state border with a car full of shredded documents. Their lawyer abandoned ship, suddenly remembering ethical obligations that hadn't troubled him while defending child killers. The private investigator found nothing about my true identity, my handler's careful preparation having created an airtight backstory. Public opinion shifted as more survivors came forward with their stories. The way Bethany finally called that hotline at 2 a.m. makes me wonder how long she'd been building up the courage. What specific moment pushed her to finally pick up that phone? I maintained my cover through it all, playing the traumatized child in every public appearance. During the Ericksons' bail hearing, I sat in the gallery's front row, teddy bear in my lap, letting them see the 12-year-old they'd terrorized. Mrs. Erickson's mask slipped when our eyes met, pure hatred flashing across her face. The judge denied bail, citing flight risk and danger to the community. As officers led them away, Mr. Erickson turned back one last time. His expression promised retribution if he ever got free. I hugged my bear tighter, knowing its camera captured his threat for the permanent record. Sarah Chen worked tirelessly building an ironclad case. The forensics team found DNA evidence in the basement from all 3 deceased children, contradicting the Ericksons' claims they'd never been confined there. Financial records showed they'd collected over $500,000 in foster care payments while spending almost nothing on the children's needs. My handler worried about my psychological state. Living through abuse, even as a trained untrained operative left scars. He arranged counseling sessions where I could drop the act and process the trauma. The therapist specialized in undercover work, understanding the unique toll of maintaining false identities while experiencing real suffering. 2 weeks into the investigation, we faced a setback. The Ericksons' new lawyer filed motions claiming entrapment, arguing CPS had deliberately placed me to manufacture evidence. If successful, it would invalidate everything we'd gathered. My handler spent sleepless nights crafting responses that protected the undercover program while maintaining my cover. Detective Martinez discovered something crucial in the shredded documents Mr. Erickson had tried to destroy. Pieced together, they revealed correspondence with other foster parents sharing discipline techniques and strategies for avoiding CPS scrutiny. The network was small but devastating, turning foster care into a coordinated abuse system. We couldn't pursue the broader network without compromising my identity, but Detective Martinez passed the information to federal authorities for separate investigation. My mission focused solely on the Ericksons, building evidence so overwhelming that no jury could acquit them. The other foster children in their care were relocated immediately. Sarah Chen personally oversaw each placement, ensuring they went to thoroughly vetted families. Some required extensive therapy after years of abuse. Others, like Bethany's younger brother, seemed unaware of the full horror, protected by his sister's interventions. Bethany herself entered protective custody voluntarily. Her testimony made her a target for her parents' remaining supporters, people who still believed the Ericksons were martyrs persecuted by an overreaching government. She lived with Sarah Chen temporarily, slowly deprogramming from years of normalized abuse. My public appearances became carefully orchestrated events. We couldn't risk the Ericksons' investigators catching me off guard or noticing inconsistencies in my behavior. Every interview, every court appearance required extensive preparation to maintain the traumatized child persona while delivering necessary testimony. The forensic evidence mounted. The basement yielded DNA, fingerprints, and scratch marks consistent with prolonged confinement. Analysis of the bucket's contents confirmed multiple children had been forced to use it over extended periods. Even the stained mattress told stories of suffering through biological evidence. Mrs. Erickson's background revealed troubling patterns. She'd worked at a group home in her 20s where 3 children died under suspicious circumstances. Each death was ruled accidental, but the similarities to our case were undeniable. She'd refined her techniques over decades, learning exactly how far to push without leaving prosecutable evidence. Mr. Erickson's history was equally dark. Former employers described him as controlling and vindictive, with a particular hatred for anyone he deemed inferior. His knife collection, seized during arrest, included several weapons consistent with injuries found on the deceased foster children. 3 weeks after the initial arrest, we faced our biggest challenge. The Ericksons' lawyer located a former foster child willing to testify in their defense. The young man claimed they'd saved his life, providing structure and discipline he'd needed. We suspected coaching or bribery, but couldn't prove it without compromising the investigation. My handler made a difficult decision. We would reveal select portions of the teddy bear recordings to counter this testimony. Not enough to expose the full surveillance operation, but sufficient to demonstrate the Ericksons' cruelty. The technical experts testified that the recordings were authentic, unedited, and clearly showed systematic abuse. The defense witness crumbled under cross-examination. Detective Martinez had discovered financial transfers from the Ericksons' lawyer to the young man's account. Faced with evidence of bribery, he admitted they'd paid him to lie. His real experience in their home matched the pattern of abuse we'd documented. As the case built toward trial, I struggled with the approaching end of my assignment. Soon I'd have to drop the cover, return to my real age and identity. The thought terrified me more than the basement had. For weeks, I'd lived as this vulnerable child, experiencing trauma that felt all too real despite my training. My handler recognized the signs of going too deep undercover. He arranged a gradual transition, allowing me to slowly reclaim my adult identity in safe spaces while maintaining the cover publicly. The therapist worked with me on integration techniques, helping me separate the character from my true self. Sarah Chen became a crucial support during this period. She'd seen operatives struggle with identity after long assignments and knew the importance of maintaining connections to reality. We spent hours discussing the case from an adult perspective, analyzing the Ericksons' psychology and the system failures that enabled them. The grand jury indictment came down like thunder. 3 counts of murder, dozens of child abuse charges, financial fraud, and conspiracy. The Ericksons faced life in prison if convicted on all counts. Their lawyer tried negotiating a plea deal, but the prosecutor refused anything less than full accountability. Bethany's courage inspired other witnesses. Foster children from across the state came forward with stories about the Ericksons and their network. The investigation expanded beyond our original scope, though my involvement remained limited to our specific case. The teddy bear had started something bigger than we'd anticipated. Preparing for trial meant reliving every moment of abuse. I practiced testimony with prosecutors who needed me to remain in character on the stand. The defense would attack my credibility, trying to expose me as an adult operative. One slip could destroy everything we'd built. My handler created contingency plans. If my cover was blown during trial, we had documentation proving the abuse occurred regardless of my age. The other witnesses, the physical evidence, and Bethany's testimony could carry the case without me. But we all knew my testimony was the cornerstone. 6 weeks after that night in the basement, we learned Mr. Erickson had suffered a heart attack in custody. His lawyer tried using it for sympathy, claiming the stress of false accusations was calling an innocent man. Medical records revealed years of untreated conditions, likely from the same arrogance that made him believe he was untouchable. Mrs. Erickson turned on him from her cell, offering to testify about his role in the murders in exchange for a reduced sentence. The prosecutor listened but made no promises. Her attempts to save herself by sacrificing her husband only reinforced her calculating nature. She'd throw anyone under the bus to avoid consequences. The trial date approached like a storm on the horizon. Every piece of evidence was cataloged, every witness prepared. The teddy bear sat in an evidence evidence locker. Its camera eye dark, but its recordings preserved forever. Those silent observations would speak louder than any testimony in revealing the truth. My final preparation session focused on maintaining composure under hostile cross-examination. The defense would try to break me, to force an admission that I was older, trained, planted. I practiced breathing techniques, emotional regulation, and the thousand small details that separated a 12-year-old victim from an 18-year-old operative. Sarah Chen delivered news that strengthened our resolve. 2 of the 3 deceased foster children had living relatives who'd been searching for them for years. The Ericksons had hidden their deaths through forged documents and lies. These families would finally have closure and justice for their lost children. The night before trial, I sat with my handler reviewing everything one last time. The weight of responsibility pressed down on me. 3 dead children depended on my performance. Current foster kids needed the system reformed. Future victims required the Ericksons stopped permanently. As dawn broke on trial day, I transformed one final time into that scared 12-year-old. The makeup artist carefully applied subtle touches that made me appear younger, more vulnerable. I clutched the teddy bear that had been my silent witness, ready to speak for those who no longer could. The courtroom doors loomed before me as we entered through the back entrance. My handler positioned himself in the gallery while Sarah Chen guided me to the witness waiting room. The teddy bear remained clutched against my chest, its weight both comforting and heavy with responsibility. Through the small window, I watched the Ericksons enter in orange jumpsuits. Mrs. Erickson had lost weight, her perfect suburban mother facade replaced by hollow cheeks and dark circles. Talk about playing the long game. This operative's been method acting harder than someone trying to win an Oscar while also solving crimes and saving lives all at the same time. Mr. Erickson shuffled beside her, his commanding presence diminished after weeks in custody. They sat at the defense table without acknowledging each other. The prosecutor called me first. I walked to the witness stand on unsteady legs, maintaining the frightened child persona while my training kept me focused. The bailiff helped me adjust the microphone as I settled into the chair, teddy bear in my lap. Initial questions established my identity and placement with the Ericksons. I answered in a small voice, occasionally glancing at my former captors. Mrs. Erickson stared daggers at me while Mr. Erickson examined his handcuffs. The prosecutor guided me through the timeline of abuse, letting me describe each incident without interruption. When we reached the basement imprisonment, I clutched my bear tighter. The prosecutor requested permission to play excerpts from the recordings. The judge agreed over defense objections. Mrs. Erickson's voice filled the courtroom, dripping with cruelty as she explained the bucket system. Several jurors visibly recoiled. Cross-examination came next. The defense attorney approached with calculated friendliness, trying to establish rapport. He asked about my background, probing for inconsistencies. I stuck to my cover story, adding stammers and tears at appropriate moments. His frustration grew as I maintained the traumatized child act. He shifted tactics, suggesting I'd misunderstood the Ericksons' discipline methods. Perhaps the basement was simply a timeout space. Maybe the food restrictions were dietary concerns. I shook my head at each suggestion, describing the reality of drinking from buckets and eating moldy bread. The attorney pressed harder, implying I'd staged injuries for attention. He produced photos of me from the first day, pointing out the makeup bruises. I admitted some were fake, explaining how I'd tried to hide real abuse by adding fake marks, hoping someone would notice the difference. The jury seemed to buy the explanation. Bethany testified next. She entered the courtroom avoiding her parents' eyes, hands trembling as she took the oath. Her testimony corroborated mine while adding horrifying details about previous foster children. She described finding bloody towels after her father's discipline sessions and hearing screams from the basement at night. The defense tried painting her as a rebellious daughter seeking revenge. She held firm, detailing years of witnessing abuse while being threatened into silence. When asked why she hadn't reported earlier, she described her parents' control tactics and threats of boarding school or worse. Detective Martinez presented physical evidence methodically. DNA from deceased foster children in the basement, financial records showing systematic theft of foster care funds, the knife collection with traces of blood, each piece built upon the last, creating an overwhelming picture of calculated abuse. The defense's star witness crumbled spectacularly. The young man they'd bribed to support the Ericksons broke down under cross-examination, admitting the payoff and describing his actual experiences in their home. His testimony matched our pattern perfectly, adding another voice to the chorus of victims. Mrs. Erickson took the stand against her lawyer's advice. She attempted to portray herself as a misunderstood caregiver dealing with troubled children. Her explanations for the basement setup grew increasingly absurd. She claimed the bucket was for emergency bathroom needs during thunderstorms. The lock was to prevent sleepwalking accidents. The prosecutor systematically destroyed her credibility. He played recordings of her hosing me down while laughing. He showed financial documents proving she'd spent foster care money on jewelry and vacations. Her mask slipped repeatedly as she snapped at questions, revealing the cruel woman beneath a suburban facade. Mr. Erickson declined to testify, sitting stone-faced as witness after witness described his threats and violence. Former foster children traveled from across the state to share their experiences. Each story reinforced the pattern of escalating abuse that ended in death for those who couldn't escape. The medical examiner's testimony proved particularly damning. She explained how the 3 deceased children's injuries were inconsistent with accidents. Drowning with bruised wrists suggested being held underwater. Cleaning fluid ingestion with throat abrasions indicated force feeding. The fall down the stairs came after defensive wounds on the arms. Closing arguments brought everything full circle. The prosecutor walked the jury through 7 years of systematic abuse, 3 murders, and countless traumatized survivors. He held up my teddy bear, explaining how this simple toy had finally given voices to the voiceless. The defense made one last attempt to create reasonable doubt. They argued about admissibility of recordings, questioned witness motivations, and suggested a conspiracy to frame model foster parents. Their arguments felt hollow against the mountain of evidence, and even they seemed to know it. Jury deliberation lasted only 4 hours. We waited in a secure room, my handler pacing while Sarah Chen made phone calls arranging permanent placements for the other foster children. I sat quietly, still in character despite exhaustion weighing on me. The verdict came just after lunch. Guilty on all counts. Murder in the first degree for 3 children. Dozens of child abuse convictions. Financial fraud. Conspiracy. The judge read each verdict as the Eriksons sat frozen. Mrs. Erikson finally broke, sobbing theatrically while Mr. Erikson stared straight ahead. Sentencing came 2 weeks later. I attended again, watching as the judge delivered 3 consecutive life sentences plus additional years for abuse and fraud. The Eriksons would never leave prison. Their biological children would live with relatives, receiving therapy to process their trauma. The case made local headlines but thankfully never went national. Other foster families in their network faced investigation, though my identity remained protected. The teddy bear that had been my constant companion went into evidence storage, its job complete. My handler arranged my transition back to normal life carefully. The operative who'd lived as a 12-year-old victim needed to become an 18-year-old again. We met with the specialized therapist who helped me process the experience without losing myself in the character. Sarah Chen invited me to visit the foster children we'd saved. Seeing them in safe homes, beginning to heal, made every moment of suffering worthwhile. Some recognized me despite my actual age, understanding intuitively that I'd been their protector in disguise. Bethany reached out through Sarah, wanting to thank me personally. We met at a coffee shop where she was starting fresh at community college. She apologized for not acting sooner, but I assured her she'd shown incredible courage when it mattered most. The CPS Undercover program continued with new safety protocols based on my experience. Future operatives would have better support systems and clearer extraction procedures. My mission became a template for protecting vulnerable children while maintaining operational security. 6 months after the trial, I received word that Mr. Erikson had died in prison. Heart failure, the report said. Though inmates whispered about justice finding child killers behind bars, Mrs. Erikson remained in solitary confinement for her own protection, her crimes making her a target. I returned to college, studying social work with new understanding of the system's failures and possibilities. Classmates never knew about my undercover work, seeing only a dedicated student passionate about child protection. The experience shaped my career choice without defining my entire identity. The families of the 3 murdered children held a memorial service on the anniversary of the verdict. I attended quietly, standing in the back as they finally had closure. Their children's names were spoken aloud, their lives honored, their deaths acknowledged as murders rather than accidents. Other survivors reached out over time, forming an informal support network. We shared resources, recommended therapists, and celebrated milestones in healing. The shared trauma bonded us while we each found individual paths forward. The foster care system in our state underwent reforms prompted by the case. Better screening procedures, mandatory home inspections, and regular check-ins with children became standard. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress built on painful lessons. My final session with the specialized therapist focused on integration. The 12-year-old victim I'd portrayed would always be part of me, but I'd learned to separate performance from identity. The skills that kept me alive in that basement translated to strength in everyday life. I kept one photo from the mission, not of evidence or abuse, but of the foster children at their new homes, smiling genuinely for the first time in years. It reminded me why operatives like me existed, bridging the gap between vulnerable children and justice. The Erikson house sold eventually, the basement renovated by new owners who never knew its history. Drive past today, and you'd see a normal suburban home with no hint of the horrors it contained. But survivors knew the truth, and that truth had finally set us free. Looking forward, I prepared for my next assignment with deeper understanding of the cost and necessity of undercover work. The system needed reform, but until then, operatives like me stood between predators and their prey, bearing witness to ensure no child's suffering went unheard. My handler retired shortly after. The Erikson case his final mission. He'd saved countless children over his career, but this one had taken its toll. We stayed in touch, 2 people who understood the weight of necessary deception in service of protecting innocence. The teddy bear's recordings entered permanent archives, evidence of evil conquered through patience and courage. Somewhere in storage, that silent witness rested, its job complete. The children it helped save grew up in safety. The best possible ending to its story. What a ride, huh? Really appreciate you letting me tag along and get curious with you. It's been such a cool journey to explore all this together. Subscribe for more content like this.